What's up, Good Vibes Gang? Brandon Miracle here with big news about Switch 2. I'm joined by GVG partners Steve Bowling, Ash
Hello.
Paulson, and we're all very excited and eager to talk about all of this Switch 2 information. There's a decent amount of it, and it's pretty substantial. So for those of you who don't know, some publicly available shipping information has hit the internet, and the internet sleuths over on Family Boards have figured out what it all means. And a lot of it is Switch 2 parts for manufacturing, and because of all of that, we can actually determine a little bit about the Switch 2's performance. So I'm going to throw it right over to you, Steve, since you're the resident tech man over at GVG. There's some big things here. We've learned a little bit about the SoC in the Switch 2. And because of that, we now know that there are 48 tensor cores, which means DLSS.
Yes. So it's interesting that you mentioned this. So I missed this news because I was at work all day. And when you let me know, I started reading up very quickly before we jumped into this video. But I had been watching, oh gosh, who's the modder? We were just talking about it. There's a modder who did a video on getting 4K out of the current model of the Switch. And it was able to actually run like a handful of games. Nothing crazy, not like Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom, but like Pokemon and a couple other games at 4K. Taki Udon is the person who did that. I strongly recommend checking out that video if you're curious about how the Switch is capable of running anything beyond 1080p. But DLSS has suddenly become a much more exciting prospect to me because we've all been talking in hypotheticals about what DLSS will do for, the Switch successor or the Switch 2. And this, to me, kind of firmly cements in my mind that we're going to see 4K games on the Switch. Now, whether they're 30 FPS or 60 FPS is still way, way, way up to debate. But I don't see any reason why something as powerful as what we're hearing in these specs couldn't do, current Switch games. To be clear, they might utilize the power in a completely different way, but current Switch games like Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, Pokemon, that kind of stuff, I don't see why those couldn't be upscaled to 4K from their native resolutions if we're even able to squeeze that out, on the current model of the Switch, even if it is utterly horrible performance.
Is it the kind of thing where you can see maybe, let's say, we start getting deluxe or complete versions of Switch 1 games released for Switch 2, like Tears of the Kingdom with new display modes, kind of like what we see on PlayStation or Xbox, where you can choose between 1080p 60 or 4K 30, 4K sub 30. Do you see something like that happening in this scenario, Steve?
So that's an interesting question and one that I've been kind of grappling with over the last year or so. The smart move, let's just say the smart move, is to not do that, to just make the games work and, definitely provide performance patches. But I think repackaging them as like deluxe or display, director's cuts or whatever you want to call them, I don't think that people are going to respond too well to that. Like if Nintendo comes out year one of the Switch 2 and they're just like, hey, for 10 extra bucks, you can patch all your games to work on this new console even better. I think people are just going to be mad, right? Because some folks own hundreds of Switch games and they might not want to pay a $10 upgrade fee for every single one of those to unlock performance on the hardware they just bought. So the smart move to me would be to provide those performance enhancements for free. Now, I do think there will be situations where maybe the developers go above and beyond. You might say, oh, hey, well, we didn't do DLC for Tears of the Kingdom, so here's a Switch 2 enhanced with additional content. And if you want the additional content, then fork over some cash. But if you just want the performance on the vanilla version of the game, then we'll give you that part for free. I think that's the way to do it. But one thing with Nintendo is that they always do the Nintendo-iest stuff ever. And oftentimes that includes just what we don't want. So it's anybody's guess. I hope that they're smart enough to realize that they shouldn't charge an upgrade fee, though.
I sure hope so too. But and I agree with you wholeheartedly. Like they should not charge for it. I guess what I was more getting at it though is, you think the scenario is possible that these upgrades could be offered, whether it's for free or not?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. I think that that's something. I wouldn't be shocked if Nintendo's internal teams have been updating games for Switch 2 for quite a while now. and just, I mean, it's as simple as, maybe for some games it's like, hey, we just unlocked the frame rate. And for some it might be, we carefully went through this and added 4K support, 60 FPS support, or rather, I should say DLSS support. Very
Right.
few native 4K games will exist on the Switch, if any. But if they add, adding in DLSS support and all this other stuff, I think some games will just kind of get a, hey, it runs at the same resolution but way better, and some will actually get a more tailored experience. And I bet those would be your real big sellers from the Switch One, right? The Zelda games, stuff like that.
I kind of hope that the majority of first-party titles show up at launch with performance patches, but if not, I think you want to hit the big ones like Zelda, Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, Link's Awakening, Super Mario Odyssey, like your big tentpole Switch releases. Make sure those are ready at launch. And I know Nintendo likes drip feed, so if they do drip feed, I could see us maybe getting 5 or 6 big ones at launch and then a couple every month. But the idealist in me is saying that the vast majority will just be ready to go.
Yeah, I could see like a portion of the Switch 2 reveal trailer just showing like, Breath of the Wild running at 60 FPS. Going into the forest and just seeing that it's not a slideshow. You could show Mario Odyssey with no resolution drops. You could show a lot of stuff like it's an easy side by side to communicate to the consumer. Here's how this thing's better. Like, look at these games that we know you've played and look at them running and looking better on this new thing. That's an easy sell to a huge user base.
Age of Calamity in particular would be a really nice side-by-side
Yes, please.
improvement. That would be fantastic to see.
That would essentially go from that game not running to running.
Yeah, exactly.
So a little bit extra that we've learned, in addition to the 48 tensor cores for DLSS, there are 12 ray tracing cores. This is not actually something I was anticipating.
Yeah, ray tracing support is an interesting one. It's something we've been hearing about in the rumor space for a while, but obviously this is the first confirmation of any kind we've had that's backed by actual objective truth, right? In that we know that this SoC has shipped with this. And at first I thought it was kind of weird, but then I remembered that like the current crop of iPhones and iPads have ray tracing support built in. And admittedly, I've not tried any ray traced games on those devices. I'm not like a hardcore mobile gamer. My gaming on the go is on the Switch. So I just haven't looked into what ray tracing performance is like. But I think it makes sense because one of the things that's great about the Switch is that while it generally does so much later, it does get ports of current gen games. And you have to offer a similar feature set to what the current generation of consoles offer. And with PS5 and Series X, that is clearly ray tracing support. Every platform except for Nintendo has it. Nintendo clearly needs it because asking developers to remove their lighting systems and add baked lighting in, that's a real big ask to port a game to your platform. That's a lot of work. Lighting is very hard. So I could see a bunch of developers just being like, not worth it. You're just going to have a console without any ray traced games or without any games that lean on ray tracing. I'm sure this is one of those features that maybe Nintendo didn't care about too much, but third parties were crowing about, like, please put this in. Capcom famously increased the RAM in the Switch for Monster Hunter. By telling Nintendo, you want Monster Hunter, we need this. And Nintendo, acquiesced to that request. And I'm sure this was something similar where multiple development partners were just like, we need ray tracing. It's what we're doing in games, and Nintendo's giving it to them. So while I'll be most excited to see what Nintendo actually does with it, I think this is one of those things where it just kind of makes sense. It's something that we're seeing more and more of in current gen games. It's an amazing effect, and it'll be really cool to see it on a handheld. Like, dedicated ray tracing hardware in a handheld is, I could be wrong, but I think this is a first. I don't think the Steam Deck or like the ROG Ally or anything has that.
I don't believe they do.
Right.
I think this is pretty interesting. Like, these specs are specific or are particularly better than what's available in the Switch right now. But things like DLSS and ray tracing feel so un-Nintendo to me. Like, it really seems like they're making sure that the Switch successor can play as many games as it needs to.
Yeah. Now, on the other hand, something we're seeing about this that does feel very Nintendo to me, but that may still not really be an issue when you think about it, is what appears to be 256 gigs of internal storage space. Now, that doesn't sound like very much, but we also know that Nintendo are wizards at compression. So, you're not getting 146 gig games like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth on the Switch. Nintendo compresses their games in crazy ways. So 256 actually might work, although compared to what is considered the norm nowadays, it does sound a little low out of context, right?
I'm a little uncertain in this case because, like, if they're going to prepare games for 4K, that's going to require 4K assets, in your
Right.
games as well, like 4K textures and things like that. Those things get big, and they get big fast.
Well, not necessarily, because I want to go back to the fact that I would be astounded if there was any native 4K going on this thing. I don't think that there will be. I think textures will be comparatively, again, and the point of comparison being current gen 4K gaming. Oh, I think the resolution of textures will be incredibly low. I think we'll be talking, you know, assets that are built for a 720 or a 1080p game that are then upscaled using DLSS to be 4K strictly in docked mode. I don't think we'll see that in handheld mode. I think we'll see DLSS bump it up to whatever the resolution of the screen is. If that's 720 still, or if that's 1080, which is what I'm hoping for. I know we don't have any info on the screen currently, but I think that Nintendo's going to keep those install sizes down because of another point that you brought up when you were briefing me on this, Brandon, which is the speed of the storage, which has some pretty heavy implications for the Switch hardware overall. Like you said, Ash, 256 is not a lot. But I think the reason that there's much more of it, because right now on the current best, the Switch OLED, it's what, 16?
I believe so.
Is it
32
16
maybe?
or 64 on the Switch OLED?
I thought it was 32.
32? I don't know. I have had a 2 terabyte card in mine forever, but
64. 64.
it is 64. Okay.
Yeah.
So 64 gigs on the Switch OLED. So you quadruple that. Which again, I do think games will be bigger. It just stands to reason that, games that hew closer to the current gen design philosophy are going to be bigger. I agree with Brandon in that respect. However, what makes this interesting is that the current information we have about this is that it's what, USB 3.1 level speeds, just a hair under what the Xbox Series X and S are capable of.
Yeah.
Which themselves are not, if I remember correctly, and this could be me misquoting, so keep me honest in the comments, which I believe is not that much slower than what the PS5 can do. We're within shooting distance of current gen console IO speeds. But the point is, the implication here is interesting to me because that 256 is not going to be enough, especially if this console has an 8-year life the way the current one has had.
Right.
We're going to need more space, which also means that there's no way in hell they're continuing to use micro SD cards. I cannot believe that we would have storage that can't match the capabilities of the internal storage to that wide of a degree. A micro SD card is incredibly slow by modern standards. So it leads me to wonder if Nintendo is going to do what Microsoft did and include some type of proprietary memory expansion that they sell, or if we're going to go the PS5 route and they'll have some type of off-the-shelf installable standard component that we can put in our Switches to expand their memory, which I can't imagine them doing like an
Yeah.
NVMe SSD, because it's too dang hot. and a portable, that is hard to put inside a portable console. I know the Steam Deck has a slot for one, but the Steam Deck is also a chonky system, like way bigger than the Switch. So I'm left wondering how Nintendo will address the need for expandable memory here, because I also think that's a piece of info we're missing right now.
And on the other hand, when I think of proprietary expandable memory, it brings me back to the horror days of the PS Vita and how unbelievably overpriced the PS Vita's memory expansions were. So
Yes.
yeah, so that's an interesting one because it's kind of one where you can see the benefits but also the drawbacks of both approaches they could possibly take here. But I would have to imagine that if they are going the former route of proprietary memory expansion, it's going to be quite pricey.
One would hope not.
Yeah, one would hope not. That's for sure.
I also wonder if there'd be the possibility of, like, having an SSD plugged into the dock, so that there's stuff that you can access only in docked mode.
You know, that was kind of where my thought process
Interesting.
was going as I was talking about it just now, is perhaps Nintendo doesn't make the Switch 2 expandable, and they say, you know, here, you can load parts of your library onto your Switch 2, but you can have the rest of it, you know, on your dock, and that'll be where you keep the majority of your games. You can perhaps, like you said, plug an SSD into that, and that will let you load games faster. But when you're in handheld mode, you can only have up to 256 gigs worth of games. It's going to be an interesting thing to see because, I mean, right now my Switch 1 library digitally is much larger than 256 gigs.
Yeah.
Yeah, mine
So
too.
I'm curious how they'll manage that. Or maybe they will have an SD card slot, and that's, you know, similar to what the PS5 does with USB drives versus the internal storage. You can put last gen games on an SD card,
Oh,
and
true.
current gen games can only go on the internal storage or some type of upgraded external storage that they haven't, or that we haven't found info on yet. I was going to say that they haven't revealed, but they haven't revealed anything, have they?
Yeah, exactly. I think the only thing they've officially said is that Nintendo accounts are being carried forward under the Switch 2, which thank God for that. But that's, I think, really the only key part of all of this that they've revealed.
Right.
We kind of skipped over it when talking about performance earlier, but we do know that it'll have 12 gigs of RAM versus the Switch's 4, which is
Yeah.
a nice boost. The Switch currently uses one gig of RAM just for the OS, doesn't it?
I believe so. Yeah.
Yes.
I can't imagine it
So-
changing that much on Switch 2.
Believe it or not, I think it's actually going to go up to 3.
Really?
Really?
So my theory, and this ties into other stuff that we haven't talked about fully yet, but my theory is that the Switch OS for Switch 2 will be much more robust than the Switch OS that we have today. I think it'll retain that kind of immediacy of getting into games quickly, especially because if you're banking on, you know, increased storage speed, that means you're banking on shorter load times. You're trying to make that game launch more instantaneous. But also, I think it's a very common complaint of Switch users that the OS just doesn't do much of anything outside of, you know, and you're talking about in the year 2024 or maybe even 2025 when this launches, we've had inbuilt messaging, inbuilt voice chat, inbuilt screenshot and video clip sharing in our consoles for well over a decade on other competing platforms now. And Nintendo has just never done this. And it's kind of shocking that, you know, they've let this slide for 10, 15 years now. I think it's high time for them to have console level voice chat, console level DMing, you know, and the ability to, you know, I can pull you guys up on my Switch friends list and just send over a screenshot from within the system without having to go to the phone app and then to Twitter and to post it, to just share it directly with my friends I want to show it to, all within the console. So I do think Nintendo probably tripled that and then tripled the amount of memory available, you know, reserved for the OS to say, all right, we're going to give them 3 gigs so that they can have voice chat running during a game, or that they can pop out and message someone during a game without having to quit the game, or, you know, or really in the case of the Switch, to just have those features, period. We don't have them at all. It's kind of crazy how, like, what we consider to be a standard feature on modern consoles is not present on Nintendo. And I think Nintendo has to realize that to a degree, because they, from what we've found, they built a microphone into the controller this time, which, what else are you using that for?
Now, I
Right.
don't know if that was necessarily in the controller or in the actual tablet.
I think it's in the
Oh,
actual
that's a good point.
tablet, not the controller.
God, that would be such a waste though. Like, when you think of it from a design perspective, and the reason I choose to believe it's in the controller, and I don't know, I haven't read the full specs, but well, the reason I want it to be in the controller is because the Switch is a hybrid console. So how am I going to voice chat if the console is across the room from me while I'm playing it?
It would
And-
be
and-
weird if voice chat were only possible when you're playing on a handheld mode. That
Right,
would
exactly.
really-
I mean, now
yeah.
they could do the Nintendo-iest Nintendo thing ever and introduce a Pro controller with just a headphone jack like the 360 had 15 years ago,
Yeah.
and make that the way we do it. But in a world where I have a DualSense and I don't have to wear anything to talk with my friends while I play, I feel like that's the way forward, and that's what I want anyway. So I'm hoping that this microphone is either in the new Joy-Con, or that it's in the new Pro Controller, or both, so that whichever way I'm playing, my friends can hear me and I can presumably hear them. But yeah, I don't know. Do we know where that mic is, Brandon? I see you looking.
It's on the console.
It is on the
Yeah.
Nintendo.
Now, there is a listing here that they assume is a Pro Controller. We don't have confirmation of that. It was by process of elimination that decided it was the Pro Controller. But we have no information on the Pro Controller itself. So that tells me there is a new version of it, and I would not be surprised if it had a mic on it.
Yeah, I could see them holding that back for a Pro Controller. Like Joy-Con, Brandon, you and I talked about this in our last Switch 2 discussion, but Joy-Con are already ludicrously expensive.
Yeah.
Like for what they are, Joy-Con are crazy priced. Like $80 for these two little controllers that don't have a lot of bells and whistles to them is nuts. And so if that's your way of keeping the cost of Joy-Con down, then okay, I can deal with that. But yes, Pro Controller needs to have some type of communication built into it. And I'll even take the 2004 era, plugging a headset in and wearing it tethered to my controller. But I just hope Nintendo, if you're going to charge me $60, $70, $80 for a controller, that it's a pretty full-featured controller.
I have to ask, though, as tempting as it is to believe that the Switch 2's OS is going to be more robust to allow for things like system-level voice chat, and the evidence of this built-in mic in the tablet part, at least, pointing toward that, how much of Nintendo's reticence to embrace voice chat thus far have been down to technological limitations and not just their cultural resistance to the idea? Like, you got to protect the kids, you got to protect the players. We don't want to give them too much freedom to chat with people because God forbid somebody get hurt or harassed or stalked or something. Like, Nintendo has kind of a reputation of taking that control away from their audience. So do you think they're really gonna embrace that wholeheartedly now? Do you see that cultural shift happening?
For me, I think they will, because I'm just thinking of the Wii U. The gamepad had a microphone built in, and while not a Nintendo game, Monster Hunter Tri Ultimate had voice chat through it.
Good
in
point.
the game. So I don't think they're completely resistant to the idea. They have parental controls on the system. That's something that they could manage through that. I don't even think the Switch Online app on the phone is very limiting. Like, if you're playing Splatoon, I think doesn't it voice you up with people who aren't even your friends if you're in their lobby?
Yep.
To be fair, I've not tried that. So yeah, if that's the case, then keep me honest. I appreciate
Who has tried it? But
Wait.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
right.
I mean, it's also important to note that we live in a very data-driven society. Nintendo has clearly signaled, like Brandon mentioned, interest in voice chat for 10 plus years now. And the Switch, as much as we are loath to admit it, does have its own weird, bad form of voice chat via the NSO app. And I guarantee you Nintendo knows how few of their players have picked up and used this app. It's a failure in every way. And the whole second screen gaming thing is something that Sony and Microsoft figured out 2 generations ago. And now Nintendo has tried it, and similarly, it has completely failed. And so I think Nintendo is saying, okay, we know 2 things. People like voice chat. They want voice chat in their games. It makes it easier to play. It makes them play longer. Those are good things for Nintendo and for players. And then on top of that, they're saying the way we did it doesn't work. We need a different way. So to me, this microphone in the controller, while it could just be, and it's very clear to, it's very important to point out that Nintendo could just be, again, doing Nintendo-y things and being like, we put a microphone in there because 3 games will have you blow on it.
Oh, God.
And I hope that that's not it. I truly hope that's not it, but it could be. But to me, just kind of their intent and what they've shown us through the last couple gens tells me that this is the next step. They want voice chat on the Switch because they know that we didn't like the way they did it this generation. It was a failure on an otherwise spectacular system. It is one of the biggest failings of the Switch that they just decided, whoops, we're not going to include any messaging functionality whatsoever. You can't coordinate with your friends, and they probably to some degree know, 90% of their players are just coordinating on Discord instead of their own app because it's more convenient to use, in the absence of actual chat. So the other part is, if you want to talk about their technological chops, while I agree to a certain extent, Nintendo is very bad at networking and internet related stuff, they also have a history of showing when they know that, and they partner with other companies that are better at these things than they are. The NSO app sucks, but they did partner with a very well versed company to make it, and I can't remember who it is now, but it was done by like a big Japanese mobile company that knows what they're doing. They famously partnered with GameSpy back in the day for Wii Online or for DS Online. So they know what to do in some regards, and I think that I wouldn't be surprised if they introduced chat, but it was partnered through Discord or something. PSN has Discord support, Xbox has Discord support. Nintendo might just say, hey, Discord, be our voice chat partner, and people can link their Discord account to their Switch account and then just join any voice calls they have on Discord or something like that. But I firmly believe there will be some type of voice chat integration.
Well, I sure hope so. I want you to be right.
I want me to be right.
I'm thinking more about the built-in mic, and if we think about previous rumors that we've had recently, like the magnetic Joy-Cons, I saw this on Twitter. I don't know who it was, but someone did a mock-up of the Joy-Cons being on the Switch, with the Switch having a vertical orientation, so it could show top and bottom screen for DS emulation. Having a built-in mic would theoretically make that possible for DS games that had mic integration.
True.
So that's just something to think about. Like, I do think NSO will receive some kind of new thing at launch or near launch, whether that be a DS service or something else. I don't think it makes sense to launch that and not do anything with it.
Now you can experience the joy of playing the Spirit Flute all over again, just on your Switch.
Oh no!
But yeah, I mean, there are games like Mario Party 6 and I think 7, which had those microphone only mini games.
Oh,
So
true. Yeah.
what if we saw something like a Mario Party Superstars 2 that integrated some stuff from 4, 5, and 6 and used that microphone component? Or as you said, Steve, before we recorded, you were mentioning Hey You Pikachu coming to N64. In N64 Online, so via NSO. So yeah, so there are different ways that they could utilize this built-in mic for sure.
It's also important to note regarding the Joy-Cons, I don't think we really learned anything new about them. So whether or not they're magnetic, but they did find the Joy-Cons, so they exist. Trying to find anything else that stood out. Oh, the dock. The dock sounds like it'll have HDMI 2.1. That just makes sense if they're aiming to display in 4K on TVs. So that's great. I actually hope that comes with some audio enhancements too. I have a lot of complaints with how the Switch handles audio over HDMI, because I have a very nice setup in my living room that I can't take advantage of because the Switch is dumb. And it doesn't have like... I know Nintendo's not going to pay for a Dolby license and stuff like that, but it's still aggravating that I can't utilize all of my speakers without plugging directly into it.
Right.
Because I go over ARC through my soundbar, and I just want it to work, and it doesn't, and I'm mad about it.
Yeah. The Switch is hard to fit into high-end setups, which is why I just rock TV speakers, which is against my ethos as a human being and a technophile. But one thing that troubled me about the dock, and maybe it's too soon to tell, but they also were able to confirm that the dock will have Ethernet, and they said from the sound of it that it's the same Ethernet setup that is in the Switch 1 dock, or the Switch OLED dock. And for the love of God, Nintendo,
Please
no.
God,
No.
no.
The Switch, my biggest complaint over voice chat, over lack of themes, over its Spartan UI that doesn't do anything extra, which is fine, but still my biggest complaint by a landslide is how slow the networking is on the Switch.
Yeah,
I have a
terrible.
2 gigabit per second connection, and I have it hardwired, and I can get 100 megabits per literally 1/20th of my network speed.
Yeah.
Like, what's going on there, Nintendo?
Yeah. That's so true. One other thing I'd like to see from launch this time, the Switch One did eventually get it, but have Bluetooth audio support in from launch. That was a great, sometimes you just don't have access to your highest end headphones, and you want to, or like on a plane, you want to just rock your AirPods. Like it's really a convenient feature in my experience to have had, and it was something that I actually was really excited about when it was added to the Switch, and it was something that I missed on it before it was added. So having that from launch in the Switch 2 would be a nice boost, I think.
Yes. All right, before we move on, I do want to make a small correction about the specs on the Ethernet port on the purported Switch 2 dock. The part number listed has a white paper. It's a Realtek RTL 8153BVBCG, which apparently is capable of up to gigabit per second downloads. So it may not be the same chip that is in the Switch OLED dock. It could very well be that it is. I don't know because I can't find information on what's in the Switch OLED dock. However, I'm just going to say, Nintendo, for the love of God, please just let us have the full speed of that chip that you're putting in there. Like, I just want to download my games faster.
Seriously.
To piggyback on that too, can we just have more reliable wireless? The Switch's wireless is awful.
It's really bad. That would be the single biggest improvement I could really wish for, I think.
Yeah, I just want them to not cheap out on networking, especially if we're right and they do include voice chat. Could you imagine voice chat just dropping out all the time because your Switch wireless is awful?
Crunchy, robotic sounding voices.
Oh boy. Oh boy.
So one other thing that I thought was interesting that we should touch on is we basically have the dimensions of the tablet, or what we assume is the tablet. And I converted this to inches because talking in millimeters makes my head hurt. But for reference, the old Switch is 6.8 inches long and 4 inches tall. I think the OLED is 6.9 inches long and 4 inches tall. It's really not that different. This is without Joy-Cons attached, by the way. 14 millimeters deep. The Switch 2 will be 8.1 inches long, 4.5 inches tall without Joy-Cons, but the same depths, also 14 millimeters. So it's actually a fair bit bigger than the current models of the Nintendo Switch.
Yeah, that's a pretty hefty boy. I mean, to me it makes sense because if the whole point you're driving home is, better graphics, higher resolutions, you're going to need a bigger, better screen to see those on. And I'm just going to go out there and say that that's what accounts for the size difference. It's not the internals, because if you've ever looked at like a Switch 1 motherboard, just the motherboard, the thing that does all the heavy lifting, it's like a minute fraction of what's inside the Switch case. That thing is all screen and battery. And so I'm assuming they did a similar thing here. The Switch 2 itself is probably not a big guy inside there. It's just a lot of screen and a lot of battery to keep that thing running for a long time. And I think we'll see, I think that Nintendo is probably, again, the screen is the one thing that we know about, but we don't have any details on. Rumors have pointed to it being, I want to say, a 6.9 inch screen, like the same size screen as what's in the PlayStation Portal right now, which is a big ass screen. But we don't know the resolution or anything else. But I'd wager that unlike the Switch's 720p, we're getting a 1080p screen now. I would bet that most games will shoot for that in handheld mode.
Yeah, we're gonna have so much extra real estate. I think it makes sense to just bump that up to 1080p across the board. I'm also hoping that the bezel is as thin as it is on the OLED, because with the Switch and the OLED being the same size for the most part, the bezel on the OLED makes that screen so much bigger already. That means that if there's no bezel or a thin bezel on the Switch 2, that screen's going to be a monster compared to the original model screen size.
Well, and that'll also be helpful in the sense that the rumors we have so far, at least, indicate that we may be going back to an LCD screen instead of carrying forth the OLED model. And while I get that from a cost prohibitive standpoint, it is going to be a bummer, though, isn't it? God, that OLED screen is so beautiful, and I'm looking forward to the bigger screen, but it's not necessarily going to be better. It's not going to be better.
I've been saying this on the Win for a couple of weeks now, and unfortunately, to be fair, the information we have kind of flies in the face of this, so I'm prepared to be wrong. but I'm hoping against hope that they just drop 2 SKUs. And they're like, hey, here's the entry level Switch 2 that has the LCD screen, and here's like for $100 more. Here's one with maybe a little bit better battery life and an OLED screen. I'd sold.
Yeah,
I'll
easily.
give you the extra
Done.
money right away.
Done. Yeah, wouldn't even have to think about it.
It's such a weird thing to try and position Switch 2 as a premium, better product when it has one glaring, like, downgrade from the previous model. Like, the internals and the performance might be so much better, but dang, playing on an LED screen's gonna suck compared to the OLED.
Yeah. Which, hey, to be
Yeah.
fair, if you're primarily a TV mode player, that's not going to affect you as much. But even as someone who I primarily play TV mode, though, when I do play in handheld mode, it's enough of a difference that even if it's not all that often, I still appreciate every time I play handheld mode on the OLED because it is so much of an improvement. So that's gonna be a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah, it's also very weird to position your new console against. I mean, and this is assuming, we don't know what Nintendo's going to do when the Switch 2 comes out. They may very well just pull the Switch 1 from sale, right? I don't think they will. But it would be, I mean, to me, and I've been saying this for years with you guys, is my thought has always been that Nintendo would position the OLED as the new standard bearer for the previous generation and just say, this is the Switch 1. The OLED model is the only one we sell anymore. But here's the Switch 2, and it's way better. But it is going to be weird to put those two right up against each other in the same family and be like, the screen on the old one's way nicer. That's just such a weird move to do. So I wonder, it just seems to me like someone at Nintendo would have raised their hand and been like, I know it might add money to the bottom line, but people are going to notice that the LCD screen is not as good. Which just, it still leaves me thinking like, okay, maybe you have like an LCD and an OLED version of the Switch 2, but then again, maybe that's their mid-gen refresh again, right? Maybe they sell us this LCD one knowing that people like you, me, and Brandon will buy it.
Yeah.
And that they will then in 2 years say, oh, here's the OLED screen model you wanted 2 years ago. Now go buy another one.
Yeah.
'Cause
Unfortunately, I see that being likelier, but I really hope not.
I mean, I will suck it up for all the performance improvements that we're going to get out of the Switch 2.
For sure.
Like you guys, I do also primarily play in TV mode, but I do play a fair amount in handheld just throughout my house. Now that I have, an 8-month-old, it is nice to just be able to pick it up real quick, play for a little bit, and if she needs me, I can just set it down and help her out with whatever. So, it's a little bit of a bummer, but I think the trade-off is more than worth it. It's just gonna suck in the short term.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. But like you said, I think the biggest complaint I have is about the performance on the Switch now. It's an 8-year-old console.
Yeah.
And it shows. It's been showing for many years now too. As much as I love it and as much as I've had so many incredible moments with my Switch and I don't regret a second of it, the seams have shown from day one, right? Like, but you forgive it because it was such a small handheld thing. Like, oh man, Breath of the Wild is slowing down, but you're like, but I'm playing it on a freaking tablet. Like, you just overlook it, right? But after 8 years, you're like, okay, you could make a better tablet now.
The novelty is waning, yeah.
Exactly. And so I feel like I'm at that point where I'm just ready for the next technological upgrade. And I think it will kind of refresh that sense of, how did they do this? Oh my God, Nintendo are wizards. When, even if you just gave me current gen Switch games, but they played at a rock solid 60 or even a rock solid 30, I'd just be like, wow, this is cool. This is all, it feels new again. And as much as I'm excited for that, I'm really excited to see just what they do that's actually brand new on this thing. Because obviously Nintendo has some ideas and I want to see what those are.
It's funny. I'm in kind of a similar, but also at the same time dissimilar place with Switch 1 because for me, like I can still go back today and play a game like Mario Kart 8 Deluxe or Smash Ultimate on handheld mode, and I'm like, oh my God, I still get that gee whiz, how the hell did they do this feeling? But or if I even play Tears of the Kingdom at 30, sometimes sub 30 FPS, I'm like, oh my God, how do they do this? But then again, for me, the crack started showing when, say, the Link's Awakening remake came out. That did not seem like a game that should have had the performance issues that it does. Same thing with something like Princess Peach Showtime. I know there are a few people, there's some people concerned that The Thousand Year Door, the upcoming remake, is going to have some frame drops as well. And so in those contexts, the seams have started showing for me, and yet I can go back to something like Mario Kart 8 Deluxe and still be impressed to this day, given how old the Switch hardware is and how old it was when it launched too, in relativity.
I think when you're comparing it specifically to something like Mario Kart 8 or Smash Ultimate, like you're comparing to the best possible scenario. Like it doesn't get better than that on Switch.
Sure.
Like Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is incredibly impressive even today. Like
I agree.
TV or not.
Yeah.
But like third parties, they're struggling, man.
That's for sure. That is so true. Yeah.
We need to spread the love on the next platform.
True enough.
I hate that I'm in a position where like when a third-party game comes out on multiple systems, I'm like looking at my PS5, I'm looking at my PC, and I'm looking at my Switch, and Switch is almost never in the conversation for me anymore. Like I just know things are not going to be that great over there, so I'm gonna opt for my PS5 or my or my PC.
Yeah, we've really reached a point where the portability is no longer enough of a selling factor in the face of what are sure to be massive downgrades in performance. I'm the same in the same boat as you, Brandon. When I look at a multi-platform game, the appeal of it on Switch in terms of it being portable is still there, and it's something I consider. But more often than not, I err on the side of caution and pick it up on PS5 or PC because I know the performance will be what I want it to be. Unless it's like a smaller indie game where I just know that the Switch can handle it, oftentimes I end up just going with more powerful hardware to have the best experience.
That's so true. Third party wise, I do the same thing you guys. It's always PS5 for me typically.
And before we wrap up the discussion, I kind of wanted to get a pulse from you guys on what you think this thing's going to cost. Now that we have a little bit more of an idea of what it's packing.
This for me is easily $399.
Okay.
I think that Nintendo has conditioned their consumer base enough to expect a $349 current gen Switch. And so when you introduce the Switch 2 at $399, it's an easy like, oh, it's just a $50 uplift from the best version of the old one. I think when you cross that $399 barrier, that's when people start to hem and haw over how expensive it is. Especially because at $399, you have that comfortable $100 difference between the PS5 and the Series X and the Switch 2. But at $449 even, then it becomes, it's the difference is the price of a game. And I think that's where you want people to avoid. I mean, $399 is the selling price of the digital PS5, right? Mm-hmm. And that alone, I think, is enough for Nintendo to not want to push beyond. Like, I think they can say, like, oh, our cutting-edge handheld, somehow they still avoid this costs as much as a PS5. Because if you ask anybody what's a PS5, they're like $500.
Right.
They don't think about the digital one. So I think Nintendo can comfortably slide in at that same price point without inviting comparisons to current gen consoles, which, to be clear, as cool as Switch 2 is going to be, it will still obviously lose in a arms race between it and the PS5. So you need to not invite that comparison. So I think $399 is where they go. You say like, oh, it's $50 more than the OLED, and you get, whole new gen hardware, easy sell, and then I think eventually the OLED drops down to $299.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was landing too, is $399. Part of me is wondering if they could possibly sneak away with $349 given the lower internal storage and the reversion back to an LCD screen. But I was kind of hemming more toward $399. Now, if in your dream scenario, Steve, they do have two different SKUs, one with an LCD and one with an OLED screen, I could see the OLED model being $449. But assuming what we know is true, or what we think we know is true, and it's only going to be one SKU, I'm thinking $399 just for the same reasons as you, so as not to invite, untoward comparisons to the PS5's price point. So I'm right there with you.
Yeah, I think $399 makes the most sense. Like Steve said, you're gonna scare your consumers if you cross that 400 threshold. Not having the LED screen, that's going to reduce cost, and then you make up for that with all the other enhancements that the system will have. So I think 400 just makes a lot of sense. I hope it's 400. If it's not, I think they're shooting themselves in the foot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah, I
think
agree.
400 is the magic number here. I will, going back on what you said earlier, Ash. If there's an OLED model, I actually believe Nintendo charges $499 for it. But
Oh,
I think the
really? A whole
reason
$100? Wow.
behind that is they produce it in smaller numbers, knowing that it will appeal only to a certain subset of their fan base, and it'll be the people who want the flex, right? Like, oh, I got the fancy Switch, so I paid 100
Right.
more. And I think that type of person that would buy it strictly for the one enhanced feature, it's like the guy who buys like the highest end iPhone every year, right? Like they buy it half just
Right.
because they want to show that they could get it.
Right.
And I think that with the OLED, while there are demonstrable, benefits to having a better screen, I think that it will be something of a status symbol inside the Nintendo community. Like, oh, I'm a hardcore Nintendo fan. I bought the $500 Switch, not the
Oh,
$400
sounds so
Switch.
gross just hearing, but yes, I know what you mean.
Yeah. So, and I also think though that there's a big perceived value thing, right? If Nintendo says, "Oh, an OLED screen's only worth $50," then people will be like, "Well, why didn't you just eat the 50 and put it in
Fair
all
point.
of them?"
Fair
Whereas if
point.
they put it $100 higher, people are more like, "Oh, okay, you fancy. Like it's more expensive."
Uh-huh.
I think if they do that, if they do have an OLED SKU and it's $100 more, I think you need to increase the internal storage just a little bit.
Agreed.
Yeah,
Internal
agreed.
storage
I
also
12.
is just so cheap.
Yeah.
Like it is one of the cheaper components. Like, sure, it's fast, but yeah, I agree. You probably go up to at least 512 with that, just as an added bonus.
That would be right in line what they did with the LED model as well, because the original Switch was 32 gigs internal storage, and then the OLED doubled that to 64. So I don't think that's a huge ask if they do that. I would be looking sideways if they were asking $100 for an OLED model. I would be thinking about that one a lot.
Uh-huh.
But if there was more storage, it'd be an easier decision.
Yeah,
For
I
sure.
still with what we've learned today, I've revised my expectation. I don't think we're getting an OLED model. I think we're waiting a couple years. I think
I agree.
Nintendo realizes that they can squeeze more upgrades that way out of a player base that has filled up their storage, is sick of the LCD screen. Like we'll have complaints 2 years on, and Nintendo will be like, "Look at this one; it fixes your common complaints. It's only
Yeah.
$500. You could, what? You
Totally.
spent that years ago. You don't remember."
Of course, like through retailers like GameStop and stuff, there'd probably be trade-in value bonuses for stuff
Oh,
like
absolutely.
that.
Yeah.
So hopefully it's not too bad of a too bad on your wallet if that ever happens. But I think we've pretty much dissected as much as we could out of the information available here. I, for one, am pretty excited about what we've learned today. I think the Switch is going to be just as powerful as I could reasonably expect it to be at this point in time. Even a little bit more than I think I was expecting because of things like DLSS and ray tracing. But yeah, I think we're in for a good console.
Yeah. This has put me firmly in the DLSS on Switch will achieve 4K in select games camp. And whereas before reading these specs, I was kind of on the fence about whether or not DLSS would actually reach those heights. But now I'm fairly confident with what I've learned in the last couple days. So, yeah, more excited than ever. Can't wait to see this thing.
Yeah, it's an exciting time to be a Nintendo fan. It's going to be a really interesting upcoming year as we learn more and more. It feels like the dam is about to break on this thing, and I'm excited for it when it does.
Well, as the leaks come in and the dam starts to break even more, make sure you're here at Good Vibes Gaming because we're going to be talking about it every single step of the way. Because I think we're going to have a hard time not talking about it.
Oh, yeah.
That's true.
So thanks for hanging out with us. Leave a like. Tell us what you're looking forward to the most about the Switch 2 in the comments below. If you're not involved with our Patreon, you can do that for as little as $1 a month. We would love it if you did so. But until then, keep the games good and the vibes greater. Bye now.
Bye.
Bye.